Hello everyone, this is Sergey from Ashanka Show, and today we're going to talk about a little bit unusual review of the new TV series Masters of the Air. And it's unusual because it's done by a former Soviet and probably later Russian pilot who currently retired. He has a Russian language Telegram channel called Fighter Bomber, and he's a bad guy. He supports Russian war in Ukraine, and he hates America, of course, because he is former Soviet pilot, and now since the United States helped Ukraine to fight Russia, he hates Americans really bad, but still he had to watch this TV series. So this is what he said. I began watching the series Masters of the Air, but it's interesting, they translated into Russian as Lords of the Air, not Masters. They couldn't find a good Russian word to translate master. This TV series is the one that made by the same people who made Brothers in Arms and The Pacific, perhaps the icons of the war series. The film is not about the military pilot, but especially about bombers, so I didn't want to and I couldn't ignore it. So of course, since it's an American movie, he would prefer to ignore it, but he couldn't because it's about bombers. Then he says, a film is about bomber regiment of B-17 bombers that bombed fascists in Ukraine. So right away, in first two episodes, there was nothing about bombing anyone in Ukraine, but that's what he said, that bombed fascists in Ukraine. Then he says France, and about their everyday life in combat, life between missions, and generally just about everything. Now this is the best part right here. What is interesting and surprising that in the first two parts, there was not a single black man, fag, trans person, or female pilot. See, he's really surprised there was no Hollywood agenda of LGBT and everything else pushed on people. So he's happy there's not a single black person, fag or trans or even female pilot. These guys are like, they going completely crazy. It's what right now their propaganda level. Before they were talking about Nazis in Ukraine, but now we're fighting LGBT influence on Russia. And this is why we have the war in Ukraine. Then he continues, perhaps the creators of the series will be forced out of Hollywood because they don't promote LGBT issue, But this is unprecedented case. So this is what they believe into. For the negative part, so he, of course, he doesn't speak any English, although his name on the Telegram channel is in English, Fighter Bomber. So translation was horrible because it was done by people who are far away from aviation. So what they use a lot of terms, of course, technical terms for aviation that weren't translated really well. So if there was a stupid words coming up, which of course, if you're a professional pilot, it hurts your ear. Another thing, every flight had some kind of accident. So they call it IE in Russian language, to это аварийная ситуация, so emergency situation. So every flight had some kind of emergency situation. Either the landing gear failed, then there was a problem with Nazis, then altitude sickness, then they flew into the wrong country, then the engine failed, or there was, hurricane during the landing. Then he continues, sure, our hero pilots, so he's talking about Soviet Russian pilots, also sometimes flew into the wrong country. The majority of them were also puking into the bag, but not on every flight. And especially they showing not like fresh pilots, but real professionals. I think he didn't understand the part. Maybe it was a poor translation. I got impression that all those pilots were fresh out of the flight school. So they were, as he said, just like Lichinka. So they still like young pilots without any experience under the belt, and they fly into Britain and they fly, to fly real bombing missions. So yeah, they were all young, inexperienced. So it's totally believable that they will be puking and missing the countries. Then he continues, but generally, without getting into small details, the beginning of the show was really well. Like he gives a shot, so it's he accepted it, and especially to show that the flight group didn't do their task, then they lost a half of their group. He respects that we're not hiding. They actually show how it really happened. I don't think they lost a half of their planes on that one flight. There was only, I believe, 3 planes lost, 10 people per plane. So he said 30 двухсотых. So this is like a military terminology in Russian language. If you're number 200, you are dead. It's a KIA, killed in action, and 300 is wounded. So this is 30 number 200s in one flight. So once again, this is the review from the guy who hates America, who hates Hollywood. So it's really interesting to see. And they said it was really interesting how they show everyday life, what they eat, what they feed pilot before flying on a mission, what they wear, how they, what kind of alcohol they consume, как бухают, how they read their orders. It's a huge difference with Laos. So now that's interesting part. He says there's a huge difference with Laos. What is Laos?
Наблюдатели ОБСЕ фиксируют это. Я уже не говорю о покушении на руководителя провозглашенной Луганской Народно-Демократической Республики и господина Плотницкого. Нас беспокоит нарастание подразделений вооруженных сил Украины на линии соприкосновения и провозглашенной Луганской Народной Республики.
Reference to Laos or Laos People's Republic, it's a reference to Foreign Minister Lavrov, who several times on different occasions misspoke, and he called Luganskaya Narodная Respublika, so Lugansk People's Republic, as Laoskaya Narodная Respublika. So now, pretty much, when they're trying to talk about Russia but they don't want to get in trouble, they say the things what's going on in Laos. So everyone knows if you say Laos, you actually mean Russia. So this is what he says. The difference with Laos is huge. And I'm talking about modern day Laos, of course. So he's comparing World War II feeding of American pilots with modern days feeding Russian pilot. Would you imagine getting for breakfast at the cafeteria, so he's talking about the Russian pilots, French toast, eggs with bacon, and real coffee? Not the coffee drink, but real coffee. Coffee drink in the Soviet Union, there was actually had no coffee. It's like ersatz coffee, like they had in Germany. They used, I forgot what is the grain, but it smells kind of like, it's not coffee anyway. So he's shocked that in modern Russia, there was nothing food-wise even close to what American fighters were getting, what is it, like 80 years ago, back in World War II. Then he said they really liked, so it made him smile, the episode when the planes were, rolling before taking off, and other pilots were racing them on their jeeps, to wave goodbye. And he said, I saw it somewhere, with a smiley face. I'm not sure what that reference to. So he said, generally, watch the show. I approve it. Then he says, and also I need to add that for the very first time in the movies, I saw the attempt to show how the pilots treat their airplane like their fighter friend. So it's like a real person. So as a plane was getting wounded and still carries its crew despite all the damages. That's what's going on for real. Plane is, it's a live organism. And there's a couple of screenshots of the comments on this post that he did about Masters of the Air. So someone says, hey, you better watch Brazers. They said, yeah, translation's pretty shitty. They said, of course, chachli. So that's like a derogatory word for Ukrainians, chachol, and we call them katsapy. So they will have to watch this series in Russian language. So another guy didn't understand the term baby piloti. So it's written as a one word, but it means female pilots. Then somebody says, hey, don't be too happy. Usually in the first season, there is no people like you mentioned, so, blacks or gays. What they do, you begin to like the serial and begins advising other people to watch. In the next seasons, they'll start pushing all that LGBT agenda, That's how they work. So they will lure you into watching American TV series, and then year number 2, season number 2, they will start feeding you LGBT propaganda. That's what they think. It's crazy. The screenshot, there's really nothing interesting besides one guy's asking why they don't make movies like that, here in Russia. Then other guy explains that Baby Pilot it's LGBT whores. And then thank you for recommendation. And there's a reference. So recently, apparently in Russia, they made a movie called Воздух, so Air, and it's a remake of old Soviet movie В бой идут одни старики, only old timers going to fight. It's also about the pilots, but apparently it was a pretty bad movie. What I saw, I never watched it. So here, one guy commenting that they're pretty much eating, like potatoes with tushonka, so that's like with spam and no coffee. Other guy says about shows, so it's a spoiler alert. If you didn't watch it, you probably want to turn the sound down. Said I still expected waiting when the puking navigator will do a big mistake. I will take the group of the plane somewhere else, but he still managed to get them to the airfield, although he puked all over. And is it true that the German aircraft 8.8 caliber could do such a damage for the planes? Another guy's asking, so does any propaganda in this TV series, like Pindosa, that's the derogative word for Americans, like Americans beat all the fascists and our pilots had nothing to do with that? Or this whole TV series like a general propaganda that Pindosi Americans won the war? So this is the one thing. There's a lot of Russians believe the propaganda and they don't understand the difference. Was just one war, World War II. For the Russians, there was a great patriotic war, and that's when they won. They fought by themselves against Germans and they won. And now Americans and British trying to steal their victory. But like we had nothing to do with World War II, or some of them think the World War II was actually their great patriotic war. And I've talked about many times. Soviet historians made this strict definition. Like World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when Germany attacked Poland. We had nothing to do with World War II until June 22nd, 1941, when Germany attacked Soviet Union. Then it was our war, which was part of World War II, because they don't like to talk about, occupying Poland, attacking Finland, occupying Baltic states, taking Bukovina and Bessarabia from Romania, because it's all was part of that World War II, but they don't like those. So that's his concern. Do they show again that Americans won the war? And I told them many times, of course, they don't listen. Like, do you understand that for Americans, it's my understanding, the main war was the war against Japan. European was the secondary, and they just don't believe that. I was like, they were attacked by Japanese, and that was their main war. They were fighting Japanese on the Pacific. War in Europe was a secondary problem. They only get involved big time in 1943. In 1941 and 1942 was pretty much war with Japan was the priority. And also in the same screenshot, one guy says, hey, I like TV series as well. Watch 2 episodes, and the black people, you say negri, that's how we call black people, negr, they will show up in the 3rd episode. So here several guys mention another American TV series called Catch-22, Lovka 22, also about American bombers. Once again, they use the word pindos that were bombing Italy. Or I almost missed the comment on the bottom. Well, if there is no black and female and trans pilot in this series, so I guess it's worth it of watching, and 3 people like that comment. So here the Russian guy Kirill shows a deep knowledge of the Hollywood agenda. He says the first TV series, so he's talking about Band of Brothers and Pacific. The Pacific was filmed by HBO, but this one is not, so that's Apple Plus. So just it's a Spielberg and Hank, but they're not with HBO. So there they have a resistance повестка, so that's like the order to film movies that have a lot of LGBT. So that's he's talking that there was a resistance to that push. And if I'm understanding correctly, these 2 guys switched to making movies, historical movies, saying that during those times there was no LGBT things. Next comment from Mikhail says, hey, blacks will be there. They're gonna, fly alone with the flying fortresses, the pilots from Tuskegee. So, and then of course, there's actually some people say, hey, there was previous comment about what about the propaganda, American propaganda. Here we go. How that relates, because it's just a war when they show specific people at the specific front. So anyway, okay, moving along. So here, some guy named Boris, not Boris, Boris says, in the USSR, female pilot during the Great Patriotic War performed outstandingly. So they don't want to see American female pilots, but in Soviet Union, female pilots just fine. Then also mentioning about this coffee drink, which is not real coffee. It's actually they use chicory in Laos. So back 15, 20 years ago, that's the only thing you can get in the pilot's cafeteria. So anyway, some other guy says, hey, thank you for advice. I really liked Band of Brothers and the Pacific, so I'll watch the show. And so they're talking about that. And also, once again, mentioning Catch-22. Okay, so I just want to mention again. So you see, if there is American female pilot, we don't want to watch it. It's propaganda. But the Soviet female pilots, they're amazing. Once again, they mention here Catch-22. They're saying that our domestic Russian air movie was a disappointment. And then another guy says, yeah, there was no propaganda. He confirms, yes, they even not a single time they showed the American flag, which I wasn't paying attention, but people were watching for that. Like, how would they dare to show American bomber squadron and not a single time to show American flag? So the Russians happy about it. Oh my goodness, these people. Here's another guy explains. So there is American movie from 1944 following the guys. I think that's the name. So they showed the reality of American army during the World War II. For the blacks, they had a separate train cars, not to mix with whites. And blacks usually only were in like a service maintenance. And once again, watch Saving Private Ryan. There was no blacks in the front lines among the fighting soldiers. It's a good, true movie. And if you remember Russian movie Perigon, can translate it. So it's like whenever flew American airplanes, so it's a flight over, they showed black American pilot, and that's a nonsense. By the way, if any of you guys know, was any black pilots participating in flying American Air Cobra and other airplanes from Alaska to Russia, that'll be interesting to find out, because this guy thinks there was no black pilots doing that. On this screenshot, there's only stupid interesting comment by Arkady. So this is a movie about how the Allied bombers were leveling cities in France during the World War II. I'm surprised. Which cities did they leveled? I know they did that in Germany, from Hamburg in 1943 to Dresden in 1945. Are they going to say anything about that in this TV series? Well, I need to mention Dresden in 1945. This is like a big Russian propaganda thing, because look, Americans bombed Dresden in 1945 for no reason, just to scare the Soviets, to show what they could do. In reality, Soviet army asked Americans to bomb Dresden because they had a big railroad station there, and that's where the troops were going from Dresden to Berlin, right before Red Army was about to start attacking Berlin. So Americans were asked to bomb Dresden train depot, to paralyze movement of troops to Berlin so they can have easier time attacking Berlin. After the end of the war, they started blaming Americans for doing this, while they requested a bomb in Dresden. And another below comment from Alexei about coffee said, back in the 80s when our Tu-95R, so that's some big strategic bombers, used to fly to Cuba, after real Cuban coffee in the breakfast, not everyone could fly. I'm not sure what he's talking about. Are you having fun yet? I thought it would be interesting to show you guys what's going on in the heads of those Russian hardcore patriots, they call them Z patriots. So next guy says, it's so bad that they don't make any movies like that in Russia. Just stupid, retarded stuff like Liquidation. There's some movie, I guess, or something mega depressive like Torpedo Carriers, which is still so hard to rewatch. So that's an old Soviet era movie called Torpedo Carriers, Torpedonosцы. I don't recall watching it, but it was a lot of, they had a heavy losses, so that was really depressing. And then somebody's asking, can my 9-year-old and 12-year-old watch this series because I have little kids, because they love the airplanes. So this is what's going on here. All right, another screenshot. So there's the Vladimir, another real patriot. He's just using bad words. Why the F do we need to watch this F and lies from Pindose, from Americans? We should watch our own TV series like Torpedonosцы, like Torpedo Carriers, for example. Then one guy, Vasya, he doesn't believe. Are you telling me that in Laos, so it's in modern Russia, they feed military pilots so bad? And once again, back in 1945, Soviet Union didn't have a coffee drinks. And another guy explains that usually Hollywood is just blatant propaganda when it goes about showing, war. Just because their movie making is so developed, they affect people not only in their own country but around the world. So it's important that our young people don't get their brains shitted on with this propaganda. Our own Russian movie making should start making movies like that and have a really good advisors, people that making sure that's filmed right without mistakes. So you see that? Oh my god. Okay guys, we got a couple more screenshots. So 9 guy says here, the gays and blacks won't be shown here, don't worry, because they had to cut down on showing gays and blacks in the movies because they started losing money making movies like that. Another guy, Andrei, says, well, if you recommend it, I will watch it because I decided to ignore another Hollywood creation. So you see a lot of people right now, there's like hate to America across the board. Like they even refuse to watch American made movies. Another interesting comment is BT just says, yeah, by the way, they flew to Ukraine in 1944. They had челночные рейсы, so like shuttle flies to Poltava, Ukraine. So it's 1944. Those couple first episodes were 1943. So in order that Germans won't catch them on the way back, so B-17 flew to Poltava, got repaired, fed, fixed, got bombs, and flew back to bomb southern Europe. And another comment, that looks like a lady is a female. Recently, I cannot watch any American, let's say, Pindosovsky, any American movies. Even the movies that I used to like, now they look to me like just, bold propaganda and show off. So yesterday I watched Chinese movie Король Неба, the King of Skies. Oh my goodness. So in the previous comments, several people are mentioning Krasotka Memphis, and I couldn't understand what they're talking about. I had to look it up, Google it. They're talking Memphis Belle, 1990 American movie about B-17 crew. So they're saying that was a good show. And this guy on the top, Victor, says that if the Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg participated making a movie, and he's talking here about Band of Brothers, and so he said it was probably the best TV series I ever watched. And there's pretty much nothing really here. They're talking about the really bad movie Воздух, Air again. That was a remake of an old Soviet movie В бой идут на старики and was pretty crappy. If you guys found me reading these comments torturous, I apologize, but I think it's important to kind of understand what's going on right now in Russia in these people's heads. So another Vova commenting, oh, don't worry about it. There'll be a whole bunch of black people coming up. And now next comment is really interesting. It says, though there is a movie about African-American fighters. For the very first time in this whole bunch of comments, someone says African-Americans, Afroamericanцы. Before that is negri, So blacks, or that's how we call it usually. So he's mentioned a movie, Red Tails, produced by George Lucas. I'm very impressed. This is like a normal guy, and actually 2 likes. It's interesting. So another comment again about Red Tails. No mixed cruise was banned by Brown law. Not sure what he's talking about. So once again, mentioning Red Tail. There was a movie. There is a museum in Takasiga. So this guy, maybe a terraformer, lives in the United States. And he said, by the way, the very first shot down American jet plane done by allies was done by the Red Tail guys. Really nothing there. And then once again, I say this movie Air, just it's interesting. They hate what the Russian movie studios produce, and then they hate what American studios produce because there's too much propaganda for their brains. Well, that concludes my review of a former Soviet pilot review of the TV series Master of the Air. I hope you guys found it helpful and interesting. As I said, it's just a different world. Not pretty. Those guys are extremely angry, extremely racist, extremely everything else. It's just insane. So this is what Ukraine has to deal with right now. Well, my friends, it's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this a little bit unusual video. As always, please don't forget to like it, post your comment, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.